All right, good morning, church. Good morning. It's good to see all of you guys this morning. Who's ready for the warm weather? Anybody ready for the warm weather? Yeah. Ready for the warm weather. Me too. So we're going to start today. We're starting a new series. We're going to start it a little bit, maybe a little different than before. But those of you that are history buffs, you're going to know this person. His name is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Anybody ever heard of this gentleman? So Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a pastor in Germany in the 1930s. You guys know what was going on in the 1930s in Germany? Hitler rose to power. And in that, he was opposing the German machine. And in that, he became a target because of him as a pastor standing up and saying, hey, this is a huge, huge problem. He saw the dangers of the Nazi ideology, and he openly opposed Hitler's policies, and he pushed against it very, very openly, particularly Hitler's view of the Jews and trying to kill the Jews, along with his attempt to control the church, because Hitler, although an evil man, was a smart man. He understood that if he controlled the church, he could control the people, so he tried that, and Bonhoeffer was one of the ones who pressed against that and argued and fought against it. In 1939, as World War II escalated, and you guys remember what happened in that time frame, Bonhoeffer was given the opportunity to stay in the United States. He came to visit the United States and kind of give a report and work with other pastors to talk about what was going on in Germany. And in that, he was given the opportunity to seek asylum in America, which there's a whole sea separating you and the evils of Germany, so who wouldn't want that deal? But after only a few weeks here in America, after his meetings, he made the decision that no, he wasn't going to accept it, and he was going to return to Germany and fight the Nazi war machine from the inside out. And his method when he arrived was he joined an underground resistance force and started to bring up people to fight and resist Hitler, because whether you recognize it or not, a lot of times if you look at the reporting from that time frame, from 1939 to about 1945, Hitler was becoming unpopular, and he was struggling with some internal issues in the country. Bonhoeffer and his group are part of that, and part of the reason why that happened, because of the press that the issue that they were causing, and the fact they were getting so many negative press for Hitler. Now, in 1943, the Gestapo, the people who were the interior people who kind of controlled the narrative in Germany, finally got a hold of Bonhoeffer, took him and threw him into prison. And after 2 years in prison, he was executed on April 9th, 1945. Those of you that are history buffs and you know your date, you know those are only weeks before the Germans would eventually surrender. He was also helped put together some of the assassination plots that they would attempt to put out on Hitler. So Bonhoeffer, his defining moment in life, defining moment in his entire ministry and the way he worked, was his decision to go back to Nazi Germany after he had the ability to quit, he had the ability to leave. He had an out. He had a possibility to do something else. To save his own skin, he could have stayed in America, but he wouldn't, because he knew that he was called to stand up and fight the Nazis. Maybe not the way that all of us would think of fighting the Nazis. He knew he was uniquely positioned and equipped to be able to do something special inside of Germany. And his writings, and one of them is The Cost of Discipleship, where he wrestles with this concept of obedience to God at threat to one's self. And they continue to inspire people today. Ultimately, Bonhoeffer did not allow the fear of the calling that God had on his life to stop him from stepping forward into it. He didn't allow the fear of failure, allow the fear of death to stop him from moving into the calling that God had for him. And if you read some of his writings, he's convinced that he's called to go back to Germany and to fight the Nazi war machine inside and from the inside out. Convinced, and if you pay attention to his history, the way he was positioned, he's able to do that. Now let me ask you a question. Maybe it's not the Nazis, but have you ever had a situation where God has called you to do something and you're struggling with the fear of what happens on the other side? Has anybody ever struggled with that before? That God has obviously called you to something. You're aware of it. He's been so clear on the calling. but he hasn't been very clear on the follow-through. And you're not sure how it's going to end up on the other side of it. So the question becomes, or the struggle becomes, am I obedient to the calling even though I don't know what's on the other side? Or am I going to stay inside of my comfort zone? There are many Germans and Jews particularly that were able to get out, and they were smuggled out of Germany because of Bonhoeffer and his efforts. Eventually, he lost his life. But the idea of being silent during this time was too much for him to bear. He couldn't take it anymore. Now, we have experienced that fear that I'm sure he experienced too. Fear is paralyzing. Those of you that have experienced it before, you know what I'm talking about. That when you're afraid of doing something, it causes sometimes you to go into a place of inaction. And most of the time, people think, oh, well, if I just don't do anything, that's fine. But the issue is if you don't do anything when God has called you, listen, delayed obedience is just like disobedience. So when God has called you to do something, and you know, and he's equipped you, and you're there, and you're ready for it, the fear that the enemy spins around you to try to get you to stop is dangerous. And we're thankful that Bonhoeffer didn't quit. And there's actually a story in the book of Esther. The whole book of Esther talks about fighting fear to step into your calling. Because fear, let me just tell you this is a bottom line. If you don't listen to anything else and you're going to fall asleep, fear is a lousy master. And if you allow it, it will control your life. And see, the thing is fear's not designed to even make you have a bad decision. Fear's designed, this is the way the enemy uses it, to cause you to have no decision. Just don't follow the Lord. I don't care what you do. That's the enemy's thought. He doesn't care what you do. He just does not want you to follow the calling that the Lord has put on you. And it's a challenging. So we're going to see here in these scriptures someone overcome their fear and step into their calling. Over the next few weeks, we are going to cover the book of Esther. Now, I did not realize it, but this became quickly one of my favorite books in the Bible. Let me give you some background. This book does not mention God one time. There's no meeting face to face with the Lord like Moses. There's no hearing the trumpet sound and the walls of Jericho falling like Joshua. There's no wisest man ever, richest man ever blessing like Solomon. Esther and her uncle Mordecai do not hear directly from the Lord, and they also are obviously, again, when we get into it, they're going to be in a situation where they need to hear from the Lord. They want to hear from the Lord. But he doesn't openly, loudly speak to them audibly. Because let me be honest. I mean, maybe some of you guys have done this, and maybe this is just kind of the preacher sharing too much with you. But when I read the story of Moses, I get a little frustrated. Because Moses is kind of whiny about stuff, isn't he? He's kind of whiny, and he had the Spirit of God on him the entire time. He knows what's going to happen because the Lord tells him, go into the Pharaoh's throne room. And you know what? He's not going to believe you, but throw your staff down and it'll turn into a snake, and then pick it back up and it'll turn into a staff. But he still gets whiny with God. He says, oh, God, I'm not equipped for that. He has those experiences, and then he goes to the Red Sea, and he's meeting face to face with God. Face to face with God. And so here's the thing. For many of us, we want a Moses life, but the truth is we have an Esther life half the time. The Lord is working in the background of things. The Lord is not openly and outwardly working and speaking to you face to face like he does Moses. This book is far closer to our lived experience than some of the other books. Because, quite honestly, this is our story. It's the Lord positioning us, sometimes us missing it, and not seeing him working. So, if you have your Bibles, we're going to be in Esther chapter 3. I'm going to take a few minutes and get us caught up to here so you can see what happens in chapters 1 and 2. I don't have time to preach through all of those chapters, so you're just going to have to hold on real quick. We're going to move quick through them. So this is set in the time of exile, and it's set after the Israelites have been broken into two nations. They've been conquered by the Babylonians and Daniel, and the Babylonians have consequently been conquered by the Persians. So Xerxes, right? Anybody watch 300? My men in the room, you seen 300? This is Xerxes, right? So Xerxes is in charge, and he's ruling over Persia. And this is the same time as Nehemiah and Ezra they've returned to Jerusalem to build the wall and to build the temple. Some Jews stayed inside of Persia. Now, what ends up happening is King Xerxes, he is throwing a party. And I mean, these ancient kings, they knew how to party too. It's not like a one-day Super Bowl party, you know, the wings and everything's out and you that's it and you go to work the next day. No, when they partied for days. So we're talking a 5-day bender here. So 5 days in, he's been drunk for 5 days. The group has been drunk for 5 days. He is partying it up something crazy. And he's got all of these, he's entertaining a group of people. And he has all these people in the throne room and he looks and he says, you know what? Somebody go get my queen, Queen Vashti. Now, see, in the ancient world, particularly in Persia, the value of a woman was how pretty she was and how many kids she could have. That was the value of a woman in Persia at the time. So for him, he wanted to show how valuable his queen was by bringing her into the throne room because she was so pretty and kind of show her off in front of all of the other leaders in the space. Now, just pause real quick. If you run into that and you're a lady and you think of the Bible is so archaic and some of the things that are said in it are so difficult, what you got to understand is what's happening in the Old Testament and the way God puts value on women greater than anything else. There's no other ancient text that puts value on women the way that God does in the Old Testament. Particularly, you see it here because the king is just trying to bring her in because of her beauty. And we're going to see Esther gets into position initially because of her beauty, but it's because of her intelligence, cunning, and wit that she actually follows through on her calling. So in this moment, the king says, bring Queen Vashti in here. So the messenger goes and says, hey, queen, king has summoned you. When the king summons you in this day and age, you go. You just go, even if you're the queen, because he can have you killed at any moment. And he knows that. So she looks and Vashti says, no, I'm not going. Messenger's like, excuse me? No, I'm not going. So goes back, tells the king. King says, do it again, do it again. She says, I'm not going. Comes back. The king goes, well, I guess, she's ain't nobody going to tell her, so what's going to happen, right? I mean, that was his initial response. But then the people around him said, hold on, king. If that happens, then no one is going to respect the men, the generals, or anybody in the culture anymore. There's going to be a feminist uprising if you don't do something and make an example of Queen Vashti for ignoring you and not listening to you. And so the king, Xerxes, he does. He says, okay, well, you know what? You guys are right. I can't have that happen. Remember, we're in Persia at the time. Women weren't of high status. So he's like, you know what? Get rid of Queen Vashti. He even signs a decree to dispose of Queen Vashti, get rid of her, and I'll find a new king. So then the people come around and say, hey, we got a great idea of this new queen tryout. We're going to go find the pretty ladies that are in Persia. We're going to bring them before you, and you just pick which one you like based on how they look. And the king's like, that's a great idea. That's why men shouldn't be allowed to make some decisions. We just shouldn't. But anyway, that's a longer sermon for a different day. But the king's like, great idea, guys. So they go and they find all these young, beautiful Persian women. Now, a couple things mattered because, again, the value of a woman at this time was her ability to produce children and how pretty she was. What also mattered, particularly for royalty, was your background. So Mordecai, who comes into the story around this time, Mordecai comes in and he sits in there and he knows, because he's connected to the court, he remembers, you know what? I have a niece and she's awfully pretty. She's not Jewish, or she's not Persian, but she's Jewish, so they may not be able to tell the difference if we can be quiet about it. And she might be able to be the queen. So they lie about Queen Esther, they lie about her background, and she slips into the line, and over the course of weeks, the ladies come through, and the king looks at him and makes his decision, and they eventually he lands on making Queen Esther. She's the queen. Now, it says in the text, and this is what's amazing, the Lord was obviously with her because she earned everyone's favor. Not just the king, which means she was charismatic, she was witty, she was smart. She earned everybody's favor in the courtroom. So the king's like, man, she's pretty, and everybody else is like, man, she's great on all aspects. So here comes Queen Esther stepping into this new role as queen. Now, she's probably 17 to 19 years old at this point. She's not super old, and she's ready, and she's the queen. Now, remember, she's silent about her background as an Israelite or as a Jew. So that gets us all the way up to Esther chapter 3. Esther chapter 3. Right before this happens, an assassination plot against the king is thwarted by Haman and Mordecai. Two names you'll need to remember. So, Esther chapter 3, we went through a whole bunch. You guys are all good? You're aware where we are, everybody, north and south? Yeah, we got it, Brandon. You guys are super smart. I know you guys are. So, Esther chapter 3, verse 1. If you're there, somebody say word. Word of the Lord says this: after these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of Hammedatha. Now, Haman, remember, he was the one who helped stop this assassination attempt. So the king feels like he owes him something. So he honors him and gave him a higher position than that of all the other nobles. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai, here's Mordecai. Remember, Mordecai is Esther's uncle. Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor. Now, this is key. Just stop for a second. The reason he would not kneel down and pay him honor was not because he hated Haman or like, oh, I'm too prideful, I'm not going to do that. It was because in that day and age, you did not, as a Jew, kneel before anybody. You kneeled before God. And when he says kneel, he means double knees down on the ground like a position of worship. And he says, I'm not going to do that. Absolutely not, because I worship God and God alone, so I'm not going to do that for another man at all. See, the problem is Haman heard that as a sign of disrespect. So he refused to pay him honor. And then the royal officials at the king's gate, they asked Mordecai, why do you disobey the king's command? Why would you do that? Mordecai, I'm sure they know. Mordecai certainly responds and says, well, he's not a god, so I'm not going to bow down. And then day after day they spoke with him, but he refused to comply. And therefore, they told Haman about it to see whether Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated, because they told him he was a Jew. You mean to tell me, Haman, remember, you're the highest in the court. You're going to let this Jew, this other one, remember, race was a big deal in those days, that you're going to let this non-Persian, he is somehow going to reject your authority and the decree of the king? Haman, you're the king's second in command. There's no way you can let that go. That certainly cannot happen. Now, when Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Yet, having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all of Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. We're not just going to make an example of Haman. We're going to make an example of the entire race of Jews that are inside of Persia. We're going to kill all of them. So Mordecai hears this and knows the position that Haman is in. He knows how much power Haman has, and he understands that Haman can absolutely make this happen. So he becomes mournful because he knows what's going to happen. Haman is the second in command of the king. Haman's going to get the king to sign a decree, and he does. Haman goes to King Xerxes and says, you won't believe this. None of the Jews are honoring you. None of the Jews are paying anything of mind to what you've commanded. So you know what, King Xerxes? We should write a decree. In fact, you should write a decree that they need to be killed because they are disobeying you, king. So they need to be put to the sword. In fact, for every Jew that's killed, I'll donate a significant sum of money, is what Haman says. And the king, he bribes the king, and the king says, you know what, I don't need your money, that's enough, I'll take care of business. So yeah, he signs the decree, and they send it all over the Persian nation. So Mordecai, hearing all this, puts on sackcloth, which is an Old Testament form of mourning and lamentation. He puts on sackcloth. And when he's wearing sackcloth, he can't visit the queen anymore. He can't visit his niece, Esther. Esther hears of what's going on with Mordecai and hasn't seen him in weeks. And so she says, well, where's my uncle? And one of the eunuchs say, he's down at the gate. We can't go to him. Well, you know what? Go talk to him and figure out what's going on. I need to figure out what's going on with my uncle. So Esther sends Hathakah, the eunuch, out to learn why he's acting this way. So, he shows up, and Mordecai told him everything. He told the queen's envoy everything that happened to him, including the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. And he also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which has been published in Susa, which is the legal area. It's like, look, we have all of the deck is stacked against us. The deck is stacked against. There is nothing that we can do. So show this to Esther, he says, and explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her, telling Esther, Mordecai, begging Esther, go into the king's presence and beg for the mercy and plead with him for all of her people. Now, here's the thing. Mordecai can't even go talk to Esther because he's mourning right now. And Esther can't go talk to the king because you only go into the presence of the king when he calls you. You don't go in there otherwise, because if you do, and Esther responds to Mordecai when she gets this message. When she gets this message, she says, look, I would love to, but I can't. Because if I do and he didn't call me, he's going to kill me. If I show up and there's a system they had when somebody would show up to the king unannounced, king would show the scepter and point the scepter at them. If he pointed his royal scepter at them, then they were safe. But because of the rumors of assassinations and kings always dying, they wouldn't do that. So she goes, I can't. There's no way I can, Mordecai. So she sends the messenger back saying, look, I can't. I will be killed. And fear has got her now because she's in a position. She's the queen. She's in a position to step in and stop this. The only person that can stop this is the king, because Haman is second in command. And he's written the decree and the king has signed it. The king has to write something different. And so she's next to the king. She's the queen. And initially, the fear of what happens causes her to say, I can't. And I'm not. And there's no way that I'm going to. If I don't do it, or if I show up and the king's in a bad mood, I'm dead. So I'm sorry, Mordecai, that cannot happen. So when Mordecai heard this, when he heard the answers that she gave, he sent back an answer to her. He said, do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. He says, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. In other words, God's going to rescue us, but he was going to use you. But since you're afraid, He'll do it. It just will be in a time. But you and your father's family, they will perish. You're not safe in the palace because all it's going to take is Haman to find out that you're a Jew and you're dead too. So, Queen Esther, do it now. Don't let the fear stop you. Don't let the fear get in the way of your calling and what the Lord has set for you. And he even says, and who knows, but that you have come to your royal position as queen for such a time as this. That maybe Esther, Mordecai would say, I don't believe in coincidences. That you've been positioned here to be able to influence the king so that the Jewish people will not die. And I get there's fear and there's all those other things, Esther, but you have been placed here on purpose. And then Esther, when she sent this, she got the information from Mordecai, she got the message. When she heard it, I think, and this is the picture that I see. I don't see, when we read the Bible, a lot of times we just kind of read the words and we don't get to visualize it. But what I see is after she gets the response from Mordecai, where he says, maybe you were created for such a time as this, that you were positioned for this. I see a Jewish Persian queen pacing back and forth in the bedchamber, going to the balcony, wrestling with what to do. Fear on one side, calling of God on the other, not sure where to go, death on one end, life on the other, doesn't know what's happening. And I think it doesn't tell us how long it was, but I don't think it happened instantly. I think she's wrestling with it for a time. Because isn't it true that we've wrestled with that same thing? That God has called you to do something, and the enemy's lying to you, and the enemy puts fear in your heart to get you to stop moving, and then we wrestle with him, just like the queen. But Esther ultimately sends the reply to Mordecai. She says, "Go, Mordecai, gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days or nights, 3 days, night or day." Now, then she says, "I and my attendants will fast as you do." Now, remember a couple weeks ago or a month ago or so when we did 21 days of prayer and fasting, I taught you that you don't fast necessarily to bend the will of God. You fast to position yourself to fall in line with what he's doing. Your fasting is positioning yourself, conditioning your spirit for what the Lord's already going to do. Esther knows what's going to happen. There's going to be some sort of action she's aware of. She just doesn't know what. So she's like, fast with me to do this. And when this is done, she says, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And listen to her conviction versus what she said before where she's like, look, I can't go visit the king. I can't go visit the king. That was her tone and voice before. Now listen to it. Fast for me, prepare my heart, and work with me in preparation for what the Lord's going to do. And if I perish, I perish. Like Bonhoeffer, the Lord has called me to this position. The Lord has called me to this thing. And if I perish, I perish. If I die, I die. Now this is important. This is not the main topic, but this is something to consider. If Mordecai was not there, Esther would not have likely stepped into this role. Mordecai was somebody that was close to her. He was part of her circle. And when he pushed back on her and said, no, that's not the voice of God, that's the voice of the enemy, she was able to listen. This is why you hear me say all the time, you need to be in a group. Because if Esther was alone, she would have missed this calling of God. But in the group, even with it's just one other person with Mordecai coming in and pressing against her and saying, that's not true. And what if, just what if you were positioned to do this? She has the courage to step into this role, which is why you hear me say all the time, you need to get involved in a life group. We have tons of life groups available. You can look at them on the app. We have some life group leaders in the room that would love to connect with you. If you go, Brandon, I don't know the first step about it. I don't know the app. I don't know how to do it. Talk to Pastor John or myself. I'm Pastor Brandon, so if you find me, I'll get you connected. Pastor John's in the blue. He's the other guy that spoke. Right here, if you guys want to get connected in the groups. But it happens in that space that shifts her thinking and shifts her perspective to be, you know what? What if the Lord did position me here? What if this is not a coincidence and this is actually on purpose? What if this is all intentional? What I think is an accident is actually intentional. And so she ventures into the throne room. And we'll pick that up next week. But first, let me ask you this question. Where's God placed you right now? Where has God placed you right now? Look around and think through your job or your family and the different positions, even in the church and different. Where has God positioned you right now? And is it possible that it's not on accident? Is it possible that it's not a coincidence? Is it possible that this season of your life is going to serve a purpose and that it's not a coincidence and it's not an accident? What if God has you in your workplace not just for a paycheck but for a purpose? What if you're going to be the one who shares faith with somebody? What if you're going to be positioned for when something happens with a coworker, you're able to step in and provide that care and love for them in a Christ-like way? What if you're going to be the only Jesus they get to see their entire life? What if he's positioned you and given you the language and the vocabulary and the understanding with the other group of people that you're going to be able to lead them to faith? or that you're just going to be able to provide a level of healing when they're going through some major issues. What if you're not there by accident? And it's more than a paycheck. And it's more than a coincidence. What if you're in this church, not by accident, not by coincidence, just because you saw the music online or you saw a video online or you got the random invitation from somebody? What if it's not by accident? What if it's on purpose? What if God has something for you? What if he's given you a vision for something? And the enemy comes in. This is what the enemy's so good at. He's so good at this. This is why Jesus teaches in parables about it. The enemy comes in and he likes to lie. And he likes to pluck those things away. And say things like, you're not capable, it's never going to work, it's not going to happen. And he creates that fear, that internal fear inside of us to feel like we're less than and that we can't achieve what the Lord has called us to achieve. And just like Queen Esther, we get locked in our own throne room saying, you know what, I can't go see the king. When the truth is, Jesus tells us that's not true. What if you're in your family not by accident, but on purpose? What if the family that you're a part of is an assignment, not an accident? What if that the Lord has positioned you to be able to share faith with a member of your family that no one else is going to reach? What if you're just positioned to be there to provide a level of restoration that nobody else is going to be able to do? Maybe you're sitting here today, and as we're talking, you've seen the Lord's hand in different areas of your life. And maybe you've seen the enemy working too, pushing in the background, lying, creating the fear. What if I do this? What if I step into this? Well, this is the calling God has on my life. It's so obvious, but the enemy does a good job of whispering and saying, are you sure? You're not qualified. You can't do it. You don't have what it takes. And let me be very honest, you don't have what it takes. I don't have what it takes to be up here preaching from this book, but it's not in our strength, it's in His strength that we do these things. So if the Lord's called you to it, He's going to get you through it. And I realize I'm going out of order, Alton, but the Lord's called you to it, He'll get you through it. My production team loves me. They're so great. Everybody give it for the production team. This is the truth of it. That if He's positioning you there, He's going to get you through it. If He's called you to it, He's going to, in His own strength, get you through this. The thing is you've got to decide to go into the throne room. You have to make the decision to step out of that position and place of fear and go into the throne room and be aware that, you know what, have the attitude, and this is so challenging, especially for us comfortable Western Christians. If I perish, I perish. If this is hard because it's God's calling, it's hard because it's God's calling. But I know that He's going to come through. I'm not qualified. I'm not going to be able to do it. That's true. It's okay. It's okay because His power will get you through it. It says that His strength is made perfect in our weakness. So if He called you to it, He'll get you through it. Now, this is the other thing I need you to get. God has uniquely equipped and uniquely positioned you. You're not there by accident. You are not there by accident. Everything happens on purpose for a purpose. And you are uniquely equipped and uniquely positioned to do that, to do whatever it is that He's called you to do. And what if the things that you're afraid to step into are the things that He's calling you to? And again, I get it. I've been part of this. I struggle. Can I just tell you as the pastor, and I'm supposed to be full of faith? Guys, I have moments when I run in fear too. It's part of the human experience. And the enemy's so good at lying to us and saying you're not capable and you can't do it and it's not possible. But the truth is, if God puts you there, He's equipped you for it. And it's not on accident. And in His strength, He will get you through it. So what if the things you're afraid to step into, What if the things you're afraid to step into is the thing that God's calling you to? The very fear that has you paralyzed to take a step is the place where God has you. And just like Queen Esther, we would come out and emerge and say, you know what? If I perish, I perish. You don't have to be the most qualified, just the most obedient. And so here's the question I'm going to ask you. Here's the thing that I'm going to ask you that's going to be your takeaway. This is what I want you to chew on for the next few days, talk about on your way home, or maybe even wrestle down in your quiet time. What are you running from that you're actually called to? Esther initially wanted to run from her calling because of fear of death and persecution. And Jesus never promised us it would be easy. In fact, he promised us that it would be difficult. He said, in this world, you will have trouble. And nobody signed up that Sunday. They didn't. They had clipboards and everything. Nobody signed up for anything that Sunday. He says, in this life you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. That it's not in your strength. All God's waiting for you to do is to step out into the throne room. Take the step. So what are you running from that the Lord has called you to? And the easy way to answer that is I want you to ask yourself, what keeps coming up when I think about God and his calling in my life? What feels right, but fear is keeping me from taking that step? What feels like it's just the right thing? It's the puzzle that fits. It's the piece that fits the puzzle. It's the last piece, and it just kind of makes sense. But fear is holding me back. I'm afraid to fail, so I don't do it. So what are you running from that you're called to? Now, imagine if we actually lived this out. How different would your life look if you stepped into God's calling every time he presented it? Because God is sovereign. I believe what Mordecai says. Look, rescue will come for the Jews. Yep. It'll happen. But you get to be a part of it. God's plan will pass, but you get to be a part of it. And so I understand the challenge of this. But what would it look like? What would your life look like if every time God called, you answered the call? What would it look like as a church as a whole? What would it look like if every one of us fearlessly stepped into our calling? Both in the church and in the professional world and in our families. What happens? What would it look like if we stepped into that place? How different would the world look if we were able to do that? So here's the challenge and the prayer I want you to pray this week. I want you to simply pray. This is so easy, but it's so challenging. God, show me why I'm here. Why did you bring me here? Why did you bring me to this job? Why am I in this family? God, why did you bring me to this church? Why am I here? And listen for his voice. Because again, sometimes it's not going to be Moses, God face to face. Sometimes you just have to be aware in the miracles that happen in the circumstances. So show me why I'm here.